And the name of this new series is Theology Reset, resetting our faith and beliefs back to factory settings. Let me ask you all a question. Have you all or anyone here ever gone through a period or a phase in your life where you felt like you needed to just reset or restart your faith? Anybody ever gone through that? We have about 6 people. The rest of you all have said, "I'm good, Pastor. When I was conceived, I leapt in my mother's womb, and I don't know what you're talking about." But for a lot of us, we've gone through periods of our life where we have had to take a good long look at the mirror, assess our faith, our practices, our beliefs, and really hit that reset button because we were going astray. A few years back, I had the privilege and opportunity of preaching at I think it was a fall council. And during that sermon, I talked about my experience in New Orleans with Katrina. But here's something that they didn't know that you all don't know. I don't even know my wife. Well, she does know. And that was the sanitized, G-rated, edited version of that whole story. So tonight I'm going to give you the unedited version, not necessarily of Katrina, but what led up to that. So I was about 25 when I went into the military. How old was I? 25, 26? See, how old were you? And that'll tell me. I was about 25, 26 when I went into the Navy. And so during that time in my life, I was saved, but let me ask you this question. Do any of you all know what it's like to be saved but still playing church? Yes. Right? So I was saved, but I was playing church, and there's no way around that. So I remember one night, and this is a moment of transparency. So I'm gonna give you all some real tea tonight. So one day in particular, I had a friend, and he came over to our base housing, and he brought bottles of rum. Sailors drink rum, and so we drank that rum to the point where we got blackout drunk. I mean, we drank that rum. We drank it like there was no tomorrow. Now, mind you, I was saved when this happened. And so some of you all were saying, what, saved people mess up like that? Of course they do. They do. Saved people mess up. Saved people do some crazy stuff. As a matter of fact, if I could poll the room, I would say this. Some of us, our falls have happened, not before we got saved, but since we got saved. And there's something freeing about the transparency of that because, to be able to say that, you tell the truth, it shames them, help somebody. So I was saved, filled with the Holy Ghost, but sloppy drunk. It wasn't drunk on the new wine, wasn't drunk on the Spirit, drunk on straight up rum. And just blackout drunk, sloppy drunk. But see, I was in a place in my spiritual walk, as I said, where I was literally playing church. And I think I had convinced myself that, it doesn't take all that, or that, some of the things that were written in the Word or were conveyed from the Word weren't necessarily how it was, and there was some gray area and some wiggle room. And as long as I did X, Y, and Z, then, God really doesn't care about all this other stuff. So that went on for quite a while, just attitude of playing church. And then I got to Katrina, and I went down to Katrina, and as you all know, and in this part where some of you all know the story. So when I went down to Katrina, I wasn't aware of what I was going to deal with at Katrina. And I knew there was a hurricane and the flood and all this other stuff. But the spiritual reality of what was taking place in New Orleans, because someone who is playing church doesn't see the world in spiritual truths. We begin to see the world almost like, it's just whatever you see and whatever the material eye sees, it is what it is. In fact, some of y'all may be able to relate to this. You block out spiritual truths. You kind of close your ears off to talk of heaven and hell, and you just kind of, that's the worst kind of rut. So I got down to New Orleans, and I began to see the enemy move in just a vulgar way. And this is crazy because the same buddy that I got drunk with, he was in New Orleans too. And I think I wrote about this in my book. I may have even shared this. But at one point, there was something, the water, there was something about the water that was just foul and dirty. I mean, it had oil and it was nasty. But even more than that, you could tell that New Orleans was under a spiritual attack. And so he got back to the base and he said, Battle, this water is on me and I can't get it off me. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? I almost said his name. I said, what do you mean? He said, it just feels like it's on me and there's something that jumped on me when we were out there. And I said, brother, and I began to talk to him and my wheels started turning. And I started to realize, wait a minute, this thing is for real. This thing is really real in terms of good, evil, God, Satan, the devil. This is not a fairy tale. Everything that I learned is true. And then during that moment, I said to myself, I need to get myself together. And I remember God gave me a startling revelation about myself. We are always asking for a word. The greatest word you can get is a word about yourself. God shared with me, he said, if you were to die right now, you would not make it. If you were to die right now, you would go to hell. And it was at that moment I knew that I had to get myself together. I could no longer play church. I couldn't play around with this thing. I could not, I don't care if men were impressed or if man looked at the outside. My prayer to God was, Lord, I want to be right. Y'all ever prayed that to God? Lord, I want to be right. I don't care if I seem right to somebody else. God, you know what's on the inside of me. God, purge me, cleanse me. I want to be right. Lord, I need you to touch and give me a second filling, a second helping. Cleanse me, restore in me or create in me a clean spirit and a right heart. I prayed that prayer. Let me say this, and this is my praise report right here. God did it. God did it. God did it. God did it. God could have let me go. God could have let me fall. God could have said you knew better, but you didn't do better. But the grace and the glory of God was such that when I fell and I called on his name, he did not turn me away, but he picked me up. He allowed me to come boldly before his throne of grace. And watch this. He gave me a whole nother chance. Now, listen, we ought to pause right there. Everybody may not understand that story, but if you understand what I'm talking about, if God has ever given you a second chance, thank you, Jesus. Because, see, all of us were not always perfect. Some of us know what it's like to fall on this side of glory, right? But I said to myself, I need to get this thing right. I said, it doesn't matter if I can get away with it. I need to change on the inside. So the next few years, I changed from the inside, and God began to purge me and begin to work on me. And I look back on that time of my life, and I'm just so grateful that I did not die in my sins, but God had mercy on me because I thought about my funeral at that time, and I said to myself, wouldn't it be crazy if you die and they have a funeral for you because you were a preacher, a minister saved, everybody saying, oh, he's in a better place, oh, he made it in, but you lift up your eyes in hell? Wouldn't that be the craziest joke in the world? Everybody's saying all these good things, but you know where you are. I said, God forbid. God forbid. Lord, I want to be right. God, do whatever you have to do to get me right. And he did it because after Katrina, I came back, and this is when the military said, we're reducing our forces. So for about 6 months, you remember that, First Lady? They said, look, we're reducing the number of chaplains. You'll have to find another job. I looked. There was no other job, and I thought I had employment. Everything was falling through. But at that time, I would go on these long prayer walks. About 10 p.m. Do you remember that? 10 p.m. I would leave and just walk 2 miles just out in the neighborhood, just walking up the street, just talking to God. And that was a moment where I was resetting my faith. And God had used that trial and tribulation in Katrina to bring me back from death back to life. Because, see, sometimes we think that only sinners are walking in death, but saints of God, sometimes we... And God used that time to bring me back from the brink back to life. And that was my faith reset. That was God resetting my faith. And let me say this in my praise report. I haven't looked back since. I haven't looked back since. Because when God really does something, when you hear God, when you really hear God, when you know God is calling your name, when you know God spared your life, you can't leave out of that and go back to the same mess. When you know God literally spared you from death, and listen, I believe I had a death date on the books. I believe that the devil had already secured a death date, and God said, well, wait a minute, let me hit him with this last thing. If this doesn't change him, you can have him. But saints of God, I tell you that it worked and God changed me, and whatever the devil thought he was going to do, God stepped in and said, not so. Is there anybody here that has a but God testimony? The devil thought he had you, but God showed up and erased his name or your name off the devil's roll. I know I've been changed, and I have not looked back. I have not fallen in that way. I have not, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. Nobody is. But I know one thing, I don't play church. I know one thing, I do not play church. I know one thing, I take this thing serious. I know one thing, I'm trying to make it in. Oh, come on, somebody. I know one thing. I am quick and to repent. That was a reset. And the more I look back and just consider the church and where we are, it seems to me that all over the kingdom of God, there needs to be this reset. And we have to, in some ways, normalize resetting. Because I could tell, even as I was sharing the testimony, some of the saints, Pastor, really? What? Who? Huh? What? You're not supposed to say that. That's not supposed to happen. But we got to cut that nonsense out. Y'all hear me? We got to cut that out. Because, if we're going to create a space, come on somebody, where folks can come in and get helped, we got to normalize what that reset looks like. And watch this. Some of the people that we look up to and not them, and look, everybody in here is human. Everybody in here has fallen one way or the other. None of us are perfect. No, not one. There's only one perfect person, and his name is Jesus. Stop putting pastors on pedestals and idolizing men and women of God. Stop doing that. Because the fact of the matter is, everybody in here is working out their salvation with fear and trembling before the Lord. Right? So we have to normalize, even in the sanctified church, the fact that, listen, I'm 42 years old, right? And some months. We are too old to be playing games about how things look and how things appear. And let me just say this, this is not why I'm talking tonight, but we've gone so far off track of what a real testimony looks like. We forgot that a testimony doesn't bring glory to the person, but glory to God. So as we look around the house of God, it seems as though there are a lot of saints that are in need of this reset. We've gone adrift. We've gone astray. And sometimes when you go astray, you don't realize how far away you are. I remember when First Lady and I were in Hawaii, not for the military, but for vacation. and I had went out swimming in the ocean. And how many of y'all have ever swam in the ocean? If you swam in the ocean, there's a gentle little current that just kind of lulls you and wraps you in a little back and forth, gentle, warm current. And you just, you don't feel yourself moving. But when you look up and look back to shore, you realize you've drifted a long way. And that happened to me. And I had to swim from where I was back to shore. And Saints, I almost didn't make it. And when I got back to the beach, I was dead. If the beach had been 100 or 50 more yards away, I wouldn't have made it. So you can drift, and some of us have this idea that we can tell how far we are from where we should be. But that's hubris. That's foolishness. We can drift and not realize we're so far away from where we should be. But there needs to be a reset, a coming back. And not only in our life and lifestyles, and there may be someone here tonight, and I don't, God is not giving me any prophetic words about anybody's business. I'm not here to spill your tea. I just spilled all mine. But there may be someone here tonight where God is using my story to resonate with your soul. And you right now, you can hear the voice of the Holy Spirit say, you need a reset too. Because you know what you are doing is not what you should be doing. And fix it now while there is still time and grace, right? But even apart from that, even apart from behavior, we need a reset in our thinking. We need a reset in our thinking, in our understanding and our perception about God. And all you have to do is look on social media at what's happening in churches and in ministries and some of the things you're hearing. And I'm not one of those preachers that loves to criticize the church, because the truth of the matter is there are good churches and good ministries and good pastors, and no, the devil has not conquered every church and every pastor and every ministry, right? Or every saint, right? But even having said that, I think we all can agree that there is, put it this way, too much foolishness going on in the name of religion, in the name of God, right? Some of the things you see are almost like, have you ever seen a video of a service or of something and you said, that has to be AI, but it wasn't AI. It was real. People were really acting that crazy in the house of God. Some preacher really said some jaw-dropping thing in the house of God. There has to be a reset even in our thinking, right? We underestimate the power of perception and how we perceive things, the power of thinking, how important right thinking is. Tell your neighbor, right thinking is important. It's very important. Because that's you have to say the last part. I'm saying that to you, right? But right thinking is incredibly important. I was listening to this podcast called How Leaders Lead. And if you like podcasts, I would check that out. And so what this podcast does is it interviews business leaders from various walks of life, sports, business, industry, but people who have built something, leaders of something, right? Organizations, businesses, well-known people. And the host really talks about, their story and their journey and how they got to where they got to and things like that. Well, anyway, on this episode, they were interviewing the CEO of 1-800-Flowers. Anybody have ever, the 1-800-Flowers? So, and I didn't know this, but 1-800-Flowers it owns Harry and David. Now, Harry and David does like the nice little fruit boxes and stuff like that. So it's all the same company. And this guy, he built it. He talked about how, he was a kid growing up in Brooklyn. He got a summer job at a flower shop. And then from that, he just decided he was going to be a florist and just launched out and he built this company. Well, he says that he had this friend growing up. And he went to school, elementary school, high school with this friend. And so his friend, the guidance counselor called his friend's father and said to the friend's father, listen, you probably want to go ahead and pick up your son, unenroll him from school because there's no way he's going to graduate. And the kid, apparently he had undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD. So the guidance counselor says to the father, he says, listen, there's no way he's going to graduate from high school. So go ahead, give him a job at a factory. Now, that way, when the other kids graduate, he'll have some seniority. And see, that's why you have to be careful. And even, I shouldn't say even, but every job is a calling and anointing. And if you are a guidance counselor, a teacher, work with kids, then you are called there by God. You're not just doing it. If you're a nurse, a CNA, and God has put you there, then how you care for people really does matter, right? And I'm on a side road, but I saw this TikTok of this woman who was pregnant, who went into the hospital in labor, and the person would not even wheel her in, but it was almost very coldly and callous. Listen, if you don't want to do the job, then don't do the job, right? Let folks who are called in that do that, right? Because so this guidance counselor said, go, come pick up your son. He's there's no way he's going to graduate. But thank God the father was not given to what this guidance counselor said. So the father did not pull his son out of school. Son ends up graduating. So fast forward 20 years. 20 years pass. This father is celebrating at a banquet, get this, his son, the same kid, this grown man now, his second earned PhD. His second earned PhD. So watch this. At the ceremony, the father gets up and he tells the story of the guidance counselor and how when his son was young, the guidance counselor said, listen, your son is not going to graduate. Go ahead and pull him out. Let him work in the factory. So the father tells a story at his celebration banquet. The son is looking all just utterly stunned and shocked. He goes to the father after the banquet and says, Dad, you've never told me this story. Why didn't you ever tell me that the guidance counselor said this? The father said, the reason I did not tell you is because if you knew that knowledge would change your life. Your perception of yourself would have become and turned into your reality. If the seed was planted in you that you're not going to make it, then guess what? You wouldn't have made it. And so I was guarding you from what was a curse spoken over your life so that you could really go on and achieve what I knew you could achieve. He said your perception would turn into your reality. My father has the same story when he was suffering with his aneurysm. And the nurses, again, thought that he was going to die and started saying there's nothing we can do. He's going to die, not understanding he could hear them. And when he came to, he said, you should not say that because someone who was weaker would have died. Your thinking, and if your thinking is off, your life will be off. Let me say that again. If your thinking is off, your life will be off. If your thinking about yourself is off, your life will be off. If you convince your children to think negatively or wrongly about themselves, which I believe is one of the worst forms of child abuse, when you trick your kids or whatever, you cause your children not to think that they are able to handle and do what they can do. That's child abuse, and sometimes parents do that because they're upset because of what they didn't do, and they don't want their kid to outshine them. It's real. It happens. If you think poorly about yourself, then your life will be messed up. Okay, so why are you saying this, Pastor? Because how much more impactful is it when we think wrong about God? When we think wrong things and wrong stuff about God, about the things of God. Bad theology kills. And all theology means is a study of God. Bad theology, bad understanding, bad thoughts about God kills. One reason why folks don't want to join the church or listen to our evangelism is because as we're communicating what God is and who God is, are we really articulating the truth about who God is? Are we really expressing who God is? Would God back up what we're saying about him, what we're saying about the things of God? And so that's why I say, in this season, we really need to look into having a theology reset. And this idea is not too foreign, it's not too abstract, because God is doing that even now. He's doing it among our young people, even in this church. I can't tell you, it seems like every other week, every month, a young person comes to me and says, Pastor, I had this dream about the rapture. And in this dream, it's as though God is warning me and talking to me about the rapture. And I almost say the same thing every time. Blessed be the name of God. God is giving you what you need to get things right. Because guess what, y'all? He is coming back real soon. How many of y'all know that? And he's not coming back for everybody. He's not coming back. He's coming back for a church without a spot or a blemish. None but the righteous. Come on, somebody. None but the righteous shall see God. But he's resetting our minds back to what saints of the early church, they used to live with this reality that God was coming back soon. God is putting that back in our heads and back in our lives and back in the hearts of young people. It's crazy. Even secular folks know that this thing is not going to last too long. There is that reset that is taking place. And so in order to do that and be right with God, in order to be where we need to be, because what God is coming back for, when Jesus left, the early church, when his disciples left, the church was one way. Since the first century, church has been through lots of ups and downs, right? The journey has been fraught with dead ends and twists and turns. But what that verse means, without a spot or a blemish, in essence, is I want to come back and see a church that I recognize. I recognize what's going on in that church. I recognize what they're talking about. I recognize their worship. I recognize their habits and their lifestyles. So one of the greatest signs that God is coming back soon is how he is pruning and perfecting the church so that we will be, in other words, it's going full circle, almost like the first century church. That's what he's doing. That's what God is doing to us. So we really want to have this discussion of resetting our theology. Now, when I say God wants to take us back to factory settings, let me explain that. I don't mean our intention is to go back to how we were or things were when we first got saved. I think I asked you all last week, took a poll of who has been saved 10 years, who have been saved 20 years. I think the biggest number we got to is 30 years. Someone was saved for 30 years. But when I say a factory reset, I don't mean going back. Who sang that song, Take Me Back? I don't mean the Andre Crouch version, where you're rediscovering how things were when you first got saved. I don't mean the factory setting. What we're looking for is not even, going back to how it was when you were a kid growing up in church, or going back to how it was under P.L. Scott or William Seymour, G.T. Haywood, or any of these giants of the faith, or how things were at Azusa Street, or how things were at Asbury Revival, whatever it is, right? And mind you, I'm not criticizing these great men of God or these experiences, but what I'm saying is this: those things, that's not where your faith came from. Your faith didn't come from down on Grand. Your faith didn't come from Bishop Battle Sr. Your faith didn't come from P.L. Scott. Your faith didn't come from Azusa Street. Your faith didn't come from William Seymour. Your faith didn't come from G.T. Haywood. Your faith did not originate there. Your faith originated in the New Testament church. That was a factory of your faith. You see, nowadays we have this title, apostle. And I have no problem with that because most of the times it's an administrative title, right? But there is something very different about the apostles of old versus people who call themselves apostles now. Because the apostles of old, the disciples of the Bible, had the authority, and that's what the keys of the kingdom were, to establish what the church should be like. And so the model of church that they built is what every church since then is being judged by. That's the standard. And so as we look back to where our standard is, sometimes we fall into the trap of looking back not far enough. And we want to look back at the heyday of things that we remember or our father or mother remembers. But you got to go back farther than that, saints of God. Listen, the standard is not what happened in St. Louis 50 years ago, what happened in Los Angeles 100 years ago. The standard is the New Testament church. The standard is what happened when Christ left the church to his disciples and they began to craft a church. That is the standard, right? So what we must do, and sometimes, and that's where sometimes, we celebrate our doctrine versus recognizing the biblical doctrine. And it's fine as long as they both line up, but if there is no line up, then we must always defer to the Word of God, right? So the standard or the factory setting is the original New Testament church. Now, sometimes we think we know the Bible. We have this arrogance, like I know the Bible. I know what Paul meant. I know what these letters meant. I know what Acts, and I've read that before. There's nothing you can teach me about Acts. No. Go back and read your word. You would be amazed how much rereading your word you find out you haven't even scratched the surface. There is more truth in the word than you can discover in 10,000 lifetimes. On this slide, I have a list of areas that we need to reset in our thinking and our understanding. We need to make sure that when it comes to these areas, we have right thinking and correct understanding. Pain and suffering, blessing and reward, human relationships, civic engagement and social responsibility, praise and worship, church culture, prayer and fasting, and gifting, in terms of spiritual gifts. These are the areas where the enemy has caused the most confusion. These are the areas that causes God, listen closely, the most embarrassment about what we are doing. There are sometimes, believe it or not, God does not want to own us. There's sometimes God looks at us and shakes his head. We can bring shame upon God. We can bring an embarrassment upon God by doing things foolishly, right? So these are the areas where we will get most tripped up if we do get tripped up. And let me say this. We have to explore this with much wisdom and with good exegesis. Why? Because when you talk about going back to the way things used to be, you have to be careful that you're not trying to dig up Bible culture and superimpose it upon 2025. You have to understand that in 2025, there is a time gulf between then and now. And so some things that the Bible taught, you cannot simply replicate without correct interpretation. For example, Paul taught that it is immodest for a woman not to have her head covered, right? Well, ladies, you go out and buy you one of them little doilies and put them on your head and say, Paul said, don't have my head covered, so I'm coming in with my head covered. That would be a horrible thing to try to bring back and reintroduce, because what that would do is that's gonna push people away. What you have to do is look at, okay, here's what Paul taught, but how is it applicable in 2025, right? We had this whole thing with pants. Do not wear anything that pertains to a man, right? Or women should not wear things that pertain to a man. But in 2025, and even back then, the idea of pants don't pertain to a man or a woman. You can buy men pants. You can buy female pants. The idea that someone is wearing pants is not pertaining to male or female. And so even as we look back and try to reintroduce and reset, we have to be careful that we don't go off into legalism, because legalism is not going to help anybody. It's just going to hurt people. You understand what I'm saying? So having said that, let's now really get into this lesson, and let's start with understanding pain and suffering, not from our vantage point, but what is the right theology of pain and suffering from a first century early church? How would they view Peter, Paul, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John? How would they view the problem of pain and suffering? What would they make of things as they see the world? Yes, ma'am. Had a question? No, I'm going to answer. That's a rhetorical question, but thank you, First Lady. Write it down so you can coach me at home. Now, let me give you today's popular charismatic framework of suffering. In today's charismatic church, we preach and position, and I'm saying I'm painting with a broad brushstrokes. I don't mean all preachers all the time. I'm being very general, but we preach and position suffering as almost an enemy of God's will, right? In other words, we say things like sickness and suffering and pain are all works of the devil, works of the enemy. You know, we say things like God always heals, or God's will is to heal you. You know, that God's will, you know, we misquote scripture, by his stripes we are healed, thinking that applies to physical healing. Well, saints of God, I got news flash. There are some good saints here who are not healed. There are good saints here who still have sicknesses. And if we all keep on living, right, then all of us are going to come down with something. So this idea that healing, and that we have to be careful, because, see, our ears are used to filtering out those little white lies, and they don't bother us. When somebody tells us that God's will is always to heal, we can interpret that saying, yeah, they're saying that because it sounds good, or they're trying to encourage me. But someone off the street, if they come down to this altar and you tell them as a man or woman of God that God's will is to heal you all the time, all the ways, and it does not happen, what have you done? You have damaged their faith. Because they're not going to hold you responsible. They're going to hold God responsible. And watch this. We got to be careful about the words coming out of our mouth. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So in the name of encouraging somebody, don't destroy the faith, right? We got to be careful about what we say, right? So listen, when the way we teach suffering is that all suffering should be rebuked. You know, that suffering and there are even people in the church, you know, don't claim that. You know, you got a cold. You got a floor full of snot tissues. You broke out in a cold sweat. The throat hurts. Your glands are swollen. You got 104 fever. Saint calls you, don't claim that. Click. Don't claim it. It has claimed me. How many of y'all have heard that in the church? Don't claim that. We've got to stop that, because guess what? It sounds crazy. Can I be honest with y'all? Some of the stuff we say sounds crazy. I'm being 100% honest. And I don't mean crazy from, well, the foolishness of God and the wisdom of God is foolishness of men, the foolishness of God. No, it's foolish to both man and God. Because some of the stuff we say, we sound like we have religious, what's that word? No, I mean schizophrenia, delusion. We got to be careful about how we position the faith. Because, see, the devil wants us to say one thing crazy, because if we say one thing crazy, guess what? All of it sounds crazy. In the way the modern day church looks at suffering is that we position it as a spiritual attack, right? And isn't it funny that nowadays release from that attack requires money. You giving money, you giving us money, right? If you want to be released, you want to be healed, then sow into this ministry. Come on, somebody. Where did that custom start? When preachers preach real good and folks bring dollars and lay it at the pulpit. That doesn't happen in church. You know where that happens? Thank you. Somebody said strip clubs. Oh my. But see how we have connected money with miracle and healing and blessing? Those things are separate. There's no price tag on deliverance. There's no price tag on healing. When Jesus saw them using the temple to fleece the people, what did he do? He came into the temple. He turned the tables over. You ain't here to get rich. Now, you can get blessed, but you're not here to use your ministry as a means of getting rich. Then what God are you serving? I had a lady call the church, and she was convinced she had a demon. I wasn't convinced she had a demon, but she was. She said, I had called these different deliverance ministries, and I found a deliverance ministry who said he would deliver me from this demonic spirit. But get this. He said that I had to cash app him $500. I said, you don't have to do that here. Just cash app me $400, and I got you. All right, I got you. How much for $500? No, we do it $400 at House of Living. I got you. And this week we're running a sale. 2 demons for $200. All right. That's how silly it sounds. That's crazy, ain't it? That's wild. That's wild. Pay me $500 and I'll cast that demon out of you. We have made the theology of suffering and turned it into a mess. We've turned it into a mess. We've turned it into a mess, right? And in order for us not to indulge the enemy, we have to recover our understanding of what suffering is. The early church would have seen suffering as stemming from 3 sources. They would see suffering, and imagine 3 circles. They would imagine that suffering comes from these 3 circles. The first one is Satan and his world, right? And by his world, I don't mean the world itself, but his system. That's one area. They would see suffering, secondly, coming from disobedience and foolishness. The Bible has a verse, do not suffer as a fool, right? Then the last source of suffering, they would see suffering is coming from the hand of God. In the same way a baby receives food from his mother or her mother, suffering is fed to you gently by the hand of God as nourishment at times, right? The first circle of suffering, Satan and the fall, right? And I mentioned last week how since the fall of man, in order for us to have right theology, we must understand the impact the fall of man had on everything. It decimated everything. There's nothing that the fall of man did not corrupt and did not mess up. Suffering is the result, and this is most suffering, is a result of the fact that we are living in a fallen world that is under the control of Satan and his system, right? God has allowed for a season Satan to claim or to walk around in the title of God of this world. This system belongs to Satan. Suffering in this sense, being this fallen sense of suffering as directed by Satan, is 1, pervasive, 2, progressive, and 3, permanent. Let me talk about that. First of all, it's pervasive. The suffering that Satan causes and that was caused by the fall of man is everywhere. and affects everything. It affects our bodies. God did not design your blood sugar to need insulin, right? God never designed cancer or cells to mutate and become malignant. God never intended on us aging. God's plan was for there to be no gray hair. God's plan was there to be no aches and pains, no hips that had to be replaced, no knees that had to be replaced. God's plan was for our genetics, our DNA to remain perfect. God's plan was for there not to be any autoimmune diseases, right? But since the fall of man, we lost that blessing, and now sickness, cancer, diabetes, all this stuff is coming because we're living in a fallen world. Even creation itself, the Bible said creation itself groans. The world is affected. The water, the food. My wife and I went to this place that my father used to take me a long time ago called My Lee's. It's a Vietnamese restaurant in Brentwood. And I remember going to My Lee's, it being a very good Vietnamese restaurant. Everything you got, the pho was good, the fried rice was good, even they had the Vietnamese sandwich, that was good. Well, we went today to lunch at My Lee's, and I tell you, the food was trash. It was garbage. It was disgusting. But we're dealing now with the food doesn't even taste like it used to taste. I guarantee you one thing, and that's this. Your Thanksgiving dinner ain't going to taste as good as it did 30 years ago. That's not saying you're not a good cook. That's saying that what you're working with ain't what it used to be. The turkey, the greens, the eggs, the ham, yam, potatoes, lamb, all that stuff has been corrupted. The earth has been corrupted. The water has been corrupted. Polluted. Everything has been corrupted. Medicine, right? I said last week that and here's what you have to understand. When you go into the hospital, you're walking on enemy territory, because the enemy controls the healthcare industry. Now, I hope I'm not breaking any news for you. I hope y'all understand this. There may be some good doctors and good nurses. We have some here tonight, right? But the healthcare industry is owned by Satan. That's why when you go in, even if you get a script for medication, I said last week, you got to pray over it. And I just saw, it's funny because last week I made a statement. I said, listen, all of us are one hospital prescription script away from fighting addiction. Because you go in for back surgery, get a whole gallon worth of pills that your body gets dependent on, then you're going to have to get someone to pray your strength to stop taking them when the prescription is over. I saw a video of this 38-year-old truck driver had back surgery. He was out on the road, and he didn't have his pills, but his back was hurting. So one of his buddies say, I know where somebody who sells the same pills that your doctor could give you, but he'll sell it to you. He sold him it, but guess what? It was fentanyl. He died. He overdosed from fentanyl, right? And so the reality is, nowadays, you're dealing with the industry, the healthcare industry is wrought with the enemy, with the devil, with Satan. But guess what? So is the school industry. So are colleges. So are grade schools. So are universities. So is the stock market. Everything has been corrupted by the devil, right? This is not government politics. We're seeing now this whole thing with the Epstein files. Who's in it? Who's not in it? We don't know. Is Donald Trump in it? Is Bill Clinton in it? Who I know I ain't in it. That's all I know. But who is in it, right? I ain't never flown to no island. I'm not in Epstein files. Raise your hand if you ain't in the files. Denise Bryan ain't raised her hand. Uh-oh. Denise Bryan, what's you? Oh, you raised her. Okay, that's good. She says she picked the wrong time not to play along. But we're seeing faith in government at an all-time low. It's pervasive, y'all. It's everywhere. It touches everything. Now, this may seem like a very pessimistic gloom and doom, but this is the way they saw it. They saw the world as corrupted by the enemy. That's the way they saw the world. They didn't see the world. They didn't listen to Steve Harvey's self-help podcast, where he wanted you to see that the world is 50% light and 50% darkness, and we just worked a little more, we could make it 75. No, it's corrupt. And it ain't going to be fixed until Jesus comes back as a conquering king. They see this suffering is not only pervasive, but it is progressive. The suffering, the fall, I mean, it's getting worse as generation goes. I remember when I was a kid growing up, and I don't mean this to be a touchy subject. I mean this in all seriousness, but I don't remember in grade school autism being such an issue. I don't remember seeing or hearing autism and mental health. Raise your hand if you understand what I'm talking about. I don't remember seeing autism and mental health as pervasive as they are now. Right? And I know it's a real thing. I'm not saying autism is not a real thing. It's a real thing. But it seems as though everything nowadays is just gotten so much worse. Now, I don't know how teachers teach when it seems like dealing with all the plethora of kids. That seems like a Herculean task. Thank God I'm not a teacher. Right? The truth of the matter is, it's gotten so much worse nowadays. And it's crazy because no one can find the source. Now, Trump says it's because Tylenol, but, take that with a grain of salt. I remember as a kid taking Tylenol, right? But they had Tylenol for a long time. Nobody can find the source of this. Nobody can trace back what's going on. It's because things are getting progressively worse. Mental health. I remember, I'm not knocking this, and please understand the spirit I'm talking now. 30, 40 years ago, there was no churches celebrating Mental Health Month, wearing green on whatever the month that is. Nowadays, it has become its own thing. But I don't remember things being as torturous. I don't remember, kids in school, when I went to school, as worried as they are now about how their bodies looked. The young ladies at school, they weren't in grade school. They weren't anorexic and bulimic. There was not this, but nowadays everything has gotten just increasingly in depression. Sometimes, we have to look at our young people with much more empathy, because the reality and pressures it takes to be young in 2025, it wasn't like when you were young in 1925. Rita West. What your daughter is going through, is different than what you went through, right? Your biggest decision was, do I wear the BKs, British Knights, or do I wear, the stuff they're dealing with is much, much worse. It's getting worse. And then they would see it as permanent, meaning no amount of voting, no amount of philosophizing is going to eradicate the evil that's persistent. I had a discussion with my wife the other day, and we were talking about Martin Luther King. And I made a comment, and I said, I know what it was. I said, I was in the department store. So I'm going into this, I'm going to try something on in the men's section, mind you, because I wear men's clothes, and I go to the men's section. So I'm going to the dressing room, but right before me, there's a Caucasian lady that jumps in front of me and asks the man, can she try something on in the same dressing room? So I look at this happening, and I figure, whatever. It's a big dress room. So I just attempt to take my stuff and go in. He said, no, sir, you can't go in there. I got a female in there. Let me take you to another dressing room. I said, what? Take me to another dressing room? You let this woman in there. Yeah, but she's in there, so I got to take another dressing room. I said, look, I'm going into this dressing room. I said, I'm not going into another dress room. She can go into another dress room, but I'm going into this dress room because your policy is that in the men's dressing room, I said, this is a men's dressing room. Yes, it is. Then I'm going in the men's dressing room. And I told my wife, listen, there are some times in life, and I said, listen, that was important, where you have to stand up for yourself. Well, what about turning the other cheek, Pastor? That has to do with retaliation. In other words, that doesn't have to do with standing up for yourself, right? So I said no, because I told her, I said, if I let this situation walk all over me, then it's going to come out somewhere else. And I'm going to walk around with a chip on my shoulder, and you're going to say something to me I don't like, and we're going to have a knockdown, fuss-out fight, all because I'm mad at the place. And I said, you know, it's crazy because what Martin Luther King was doing back in the 60s wouldn't work in 2025. Because you can't appeal to love and to reason and to decency, because we're living in an environment where there is no decency. There was a time where politicians could debate, but it didn't have to get to the point to where as nasty as it. I literally saw the president of these great United States look at a reporter on Air Force One and said, "Quiet, piggy." That's what he said. Y'all didn't see that? Quiet, piggy. What kind of nonsense? And listen, I'm not being Democrat or Republican. You don't have to, get upset with me. I'm not, controlled. I'm not talking like, I'm just saying what is. I remember when Obama was giving the State of the Union, you lie. Right on the floor of the Congress. Things have gotten to the point now where voting and marching and protesting, that ain't gonna change nothing. Pastor, sounds very pessimistic, but it's true. We've voted, we've marched, we've protested, and look at where we are. Read Cornel West. Cornel West just came out, well, didn't just, but he came out with a book where he says that racism in 2025 is worse than racism even back in Jim Crow and slavery. And he says the reason that is the case is because the racism we have now is more pervasive and it's invisible. In other words, it is hidden behind a system, therefore it cannot be fought. And so the reality, people of God, is that the voting, the protests, and the marching, and I'm not saying you should not do any of that, but believe me that we can all get together and vote and sing Kumbaya, but guess what? We are still living in a fallen world. And the only movement that we're really looking for is when Jesus Christ cracks open that sky and the angel blows a trumpet and he comes back to get his children. Because I don't know about y'all, but this world is not my home. Come on, talk back if you hear me. And so what the Bible said, what they would see is this is reality. Well, Pastor, that seems grim, but it wasn't to them. Because, see, they said we can have joy in the midst of this. Not joy by what we see, but joy that comes on the inside. Saints of God, we had a good time in prayer before service. And one reason it was so good is because God was giving us and hooking us back into that joy. In other words, whatever I have to deal with out there, guess what, devil? I got joy on the inside. What kind of joy? Not the kind of joy the world gives me and can take away, but I got a kind of joy that comes from the Holy Ghost. Come on, talk back if you know what that kind of joy is. I got joy of the Holy Ghost. That is the fruit of the Spirit. I'm talking about the kind of joy that will let you keep your head up even when you're facing disaster. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Joy that will help you smile even on your sick bed. Joy that even as you're burying your loved one, you'll look up to heaven and say, God, I still praise you. Lord, this is still the day that you have made. I will still rejoice and be glad. And I'm talking about a joy that comes from the soul. You see, as a saint of God, this world was never meant to be the source of your joy. Your joy is supposed to be an inside job. And if you are not fostering and flaming the fire of that joy, you have no one else to blame but yourself. See, saints of God, somewhere along the way, you thought that you could make it without being a worshiper. You thought you could make it without praising God. But I'm here to tell you that praise is what keeps you sane. Worship is what keeps you from snapping. Because when you look out on the world and you see the benefits being cut, the thing that doesn't make you snap is when you can steal away in your prayer closet and look up to God and say, God, I don't understand it, but Lord, I trust you. God, I don't know why, but God, I will bless your name. When? At all times. And your praise will always be in my mouth. See, real praise is an act of rebellion, an act of defiance. Real praise is an act of revolt. Real praise and say, yeah, devil, I see the situation I'm in. But devil, even though I see what I'm in, I will not submit to the environment around me. But even in this, I will bless the name of the Lord. I wish I had about 5 people that understood what it's like to bless God in a valley. If you've ever been in a lion's den, but still had to look up and say, God, I find no fault. If you've ever been in a furnace, but saw somebody else in the furnace that looks like the Son of God and begin... Where are my worshipers at that have made up their mind that they will bless God regardless of the situation? Has your back ever been up against a wall so bad that all you had was your worship? All you had was your praise, where you had to praise to keep from going crazy. Where you had to tell yourself, listen, if I follow this rabbit hole down, I will lose everything. Come on, pull back and begin to understand God ain't did nothing bad to me. Come on, open up your mouth right now. Say, I find no fault in you, God. I find no fault in you, God. Lord, you are perfect and holy. Stop looking to bring God up on charges. Stop sending the police after God. Stop looking to indict God. You got a grand jury called out on God and how he's running your life. Listen, cancel and drop all the charges. Understand that God has not violated his covenant with you. I wish somebody would say he's been better to me than I've been to myself. Well, even what I have, I don't deserve. He's a good God. He's a wonderful God. And devil, you can't change my mind. God has been good to me. God has been good. That's how they saw suffering. I'm in this world, but my joy is supernatural. My joy is otherworldly. A peace that surpasses all understanding. You ever been in a situation where folks around you were wondering and trying to figure out how you're still standing? Oh, I got peace that surpasses all understanding. Whatever the world has, God has something on the inside that will allow you not only to survive, saints, but he wants you to thrive. Stop saying you're making it. No, you're doing more than making it. You're thriving in God. Come on, you're not just surviving, you're thriving in God. You're not fighting the defensive fight, you're fighting an offensive fight. You don't need the world to change for you to have some joy. Oh, if I just get off this job and get to another job. Yeah, get another job if they pay more money, if it's a better job. But don't expect the job to change what's on the inside. What changes the inside is the inside. Pray until something happens. And I don't mean pray in terms of asking for stuff. I mean pray in terms of just blessing God until your mood changes. That's how they saw suffering. They did not see the world as their source of joy, but their joy came from the inside. They made it through persecution that was far worse than any of us have ever gone through. There's a story of the martyrdom of 2 young Christian women, Perpetua and some other young lady, who were brought into the Colosseum. And at that time, Rome would either kill Christians or gladiators or wild animals. So they were brought into the Coliseum, right in the middle of the Coliseum. People are cheering and like a WWE, same environment. Andre. So they saw these lions, and they gave them and all this is historical record. They gave them one last chance to recant and denounce their faith. For these lions were let off to devour them. And to death they said, no, we will not recant, we will not denounce our faith. The lions let go and they devoured them. That's the type of persecution that our brothers and sisters not only withstood in, but had joy through. So you're telling me what you're facing in 2025, you can't pull it together and have some joy with what you're going through in life? The devil is a lie. See, the joy that God gives you has already been tested in the Colosseum in Rome. The joy you have has already been tested in Persia and Syria and Babylon. If it was able to help them, that joy is good enough to last in St. Louis in 2025. It's good enough to help you where, come on, ushers. Next.